I hired a man to clean up the yard while my daughter and son-in-law were on vacation. A while later, he called me in a panic. "Sir, I hear someone crying inside the house." I rushed over and discovered a horrifying secret about my daughter. I realized she was more cruel than I had ever imagined. It took just one phone call, one decision, and my daughter lost everything. Before I tell you what happened next, comment where you're watching from and whether you trust your instincts in moments like this. Like and subscribe to follow the journey. This is a fictional story with dramatized details for depth and meaningful impact. Any resemblance is purely coincidental. I am a social worker, or I was for 40 years. Retired now technically. 8 years out of the Hennepin County Child Protection Services. But you don't retire the instinct. You don't untrain your brain to notice the small things, the way a voice tightens on certain words, the pauses that last too long, the explanations that come too quickly. 40 years of walking into homes where children were hidden, where lies were perfected, where silence was weaponized. That doesn't leave you. My name is Douglas Hartman. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in uptown Minneapolis, 3 blocks from Lake Calhoun, though they call it Bidemakaska now. I've been here since Eleanor passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. Alzheimer's before that. She was my wife for 38 years, and for the last 3, she didn't remember my name. I still buy the Cheerios she used to eat every morning. I don't know why. I keep busy. I consult for the county, sometimes train new caseworkers, testify in court. I walk 3 miles every morning around the lake. It's a quiet life. A good life, I suppose. But it's lonely. My daughter Amanda lives in Edina with her husband Tyler. I don't see her much, maybe twice a year. We used to be close. When she was little, she'd climb into my lap and say, "Daddy, tell me about the kids you helped today." She believed I could light up the world's dark corners. I don't know when we drifted apart. Maybe after her first husband died in a motorcycle crash 3 years ago. Or maybe when she married Tyler. I met him twice. Both times I didn't like him. There's a kind of man who smiles too much, who shakes your hand too firmly, who never breaks eye contact, because he's learned that's what confident people do. Tyler was that kind of man. But Amanda seemed happy, and who was I to judge? So when my phone rang on the morning of July 8th, 2023, a Tuesday bright and hot, I was surprised to see Amanda's name. We didn't talk much. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad," she said. No greeting. Her voice was tight-clipped. "I need a favor." I set down my coffee. "Sure, honey. What's going on?" "We got a notice from the HOA. The tree in the front yard. The big oak. The branches are hanging over the property line. We have to get it trimmed by July 15th, or they'll fine us $350. I frowned. "Okay. Do you need a recommendation?" "We're leaving tomorrow," she cut in. "Tyler and I, going out of town for a couple weeks. I thought maybe you could call someone, get it handled, we'll pay you back." Tomorrow. A 2-week trip, and she was calling me the day before. "Where are you going?" I asked. A pause. Longer than it should have been. "Just a vacation. We've had it planned for a while. I meant to take care of the tree thing earlier, but it slipped my mind. That was the first lie. Not a big one. But I heard it. The way her voice went up at the end, turning a statement into a question, like she was asking me to believe her. I'd heard that tone 10,000 times in my career. "Amanda," I said gently. "Is everything okay?" Of course. Too fast. Why wouldn't it be? I could have pressed. I should have. But she was my daughter, not a case file. So I backed off. "All right. I'll take care of it. Do you have a spare key?" "Under the turtle planter by the front door." "Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it. Anytime, sweetheart. I have to go. Tyler's waiting." And she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. Tyler's waiting. The way she said it, not, "We're about to leave," not, "I'm running late." Just, "Tyler's waiting." Like he was standing over her shoulder. I shook my head. I was overthinking. Amanda was 32 years old, a senior product manager, financially stable, living in a nice house in Edina. She didn't need me hovering. She needed a tree trimmed. I called William Anderson, a tree service guy I'd used before. He agreed to handle it the next afternoon at 2 o'clock. I texted him Amanda's address, 4287 Lakeview Terrace, Edina, Minnesota, 55436. I should have felt relieved. Problem solved. But I didn't. I felt uneasy. That brittle edge in her voice. The too quick explanations. Tyler's waiting. I thought about Amanda as a little girl, 6 years old, sitting on my lap. "Daddy," she'd asked, "how do you know when someone's lying?" I'd smoothed her hair and said, "You listen to what they're not saying, sweetie. You pay attention to the spaces between the words." I stared at my phone. July 8th. William would be there tomorrow. Amanda and Tyler would be on their vacation. Everything would be fine, except it wouldn't. Something in my gut, that 40-year-old instinct that had never steered me wrong, whispered, "This isn't about a tree." William Anderson called me at 2:47 p.m. on July 9th. I'd been checking my phone every 10 minutes since noon, waiting for confirmation the tree job was finished. When his name flashed on the screen, I felt relief for half a second. Then I heard his voice. "Mr. Hartman, not Douglas, not the easy tone from yesterday." His voice was tight, strained. "You need to come here. Now." I was on my feet before I realized I'd moved. The novel in my lap slid to the floor. "What's wrong?" There's wind rushed through the phone. Leaves rustled. He was outside. "I'm at your daughter's house. I was trimming branches near the second floor." "Mr. Hartman, I think there's a child in the attic." Everything inside me locked into place. 40 years of crisis work turned my voice calm and flat. "What did you hear?" Crying. I was on the ladder near the attic window. "It's faint, but it's there." "Your daughter didn't say anything about a kid, did she?" "No, Amanda hadn't. Not yesterday. Not in the 2 years since I'd last seen her." "I'm on my way," I said. "Don't leave. Don't go inside. Stay where you are." "Should I call the police?" "Not yet. Let me get there first." I grabbed my keys and ran. The drive from uptown to Edina usually takes 20 minutes. I made it in 14. I didn't exactly speed. I just didn't hesitate. I drove the way you do when a caseworker says, "We need you at the hospital now." When time is the enemy and a child might be waiting. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind was clear. But beneath the discipline I'd built over decades, there was something else: fear. Not professional concern, personal fear. The fear of a grandfather who suddenly realizes he may not know the truth about his own daughter. Amanda's voice yesterday had been tight-rushed. Tyler's waiting. A vague explanation about a trip. She'd hung up before I could ask more questions. And now this, a child crying in an attic in a house where no child was supposed to be. I thought about Charlotte, Amanda's daughter from her first marriage. I'd seen her once at her father's memorial 3 years ago. She'd been 2 tiny blonde curls, wide eyes. I'd wanted to hold her, but Amanda kept her close. After the service, she said they needed space. Time. I respected it. I waited for her to call. She never did. Was Charlotte 5, now 6? I didn't even know. The realization hit hard. I didn't know if my granddaughter was safe. I didn't know where she was. I didn't know if she was even alive. Stop. Focus on facts. A child is crying in Amanda's attic. William heard it. That's what we know. Speculation, in my experience, was often truth waiting to surface. I pulled onto Lakeview Terrace at exactly 3. Amanda's house, 4287, was a neat 2-story colonial with pale gray siding and white trim. An enormous oak tree spread across the yard, thick branches stretching over the roof. A silver ladder leaned against the trunk. William stood at its base, staring up as if the house itself frightened him. He turned when I stepped out of the car. His face was pale drawn. 65 years old, and in that moment he looked every bit of it. "Show me," I said. He nodded and gestured to the ladder. I climbed 6 rungs, 8, 10, until I was level with the second-floor windows. The attic window sat under the eaves, small and dusty. Then I heard it, so faint I might have dismissed it if I hadn't been listening carefully. A thin, wavering sound. Not wind. Not an animal. A child. Crying. I held still. The sound came in soft, hitching waves, the exhausted cry of someone who had been crying too long. I'd heard that sound before in emergency rooms, in police cruisers, in homes where children had learned no one was coming. I climbed down. My hands trembled now. "You heard it," William said. "I heard it. What do we do?" I looked at the tidy flower beds, the swept porch, the welcome mat that read, "Home, sweet home." I heard Amanda's voice in my memory, Tyler's waiting. The quick goodbye. 2 years of silence. "There's a spare key," I said, "under the turtle planter." We walked to the porch. I lifted the ceramic turtle and found the silver key beneath it, warm from the sun. "Should I call the police now?" William asked. He was a careful man, one who believed in procedure. In any other situation, I would have agreed. Let authorities handle it. But this was my daughter's house. If we were wrong, if the sound came from a television from a neighbor's yard, I didn't want to destroy her life with a misunderstanding. But if we were right— "Not yet," I said quietly. "Let me see first." I unlocked the door. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung inward. Cool air spilled out. The thermostat must have been set low, 65 maybe. I shivered as I stepped inside. The house was dark, immaculate. A row of shoes lined the entryway, Amanda's sneakers, Tyler's boots, and a pair of tiny pink sandals. Fresh white lilies filled a vase on the table, their scent heavy in the cool air. A framed photo hung on the wall, Amanda and Tyler smiling on a beach, his arm draped around her shoulders. Everything looked normal, orderly, peaceful, but above us, faint and fragile, the crying continued. And my daughter had never said a word about a child. The stairs were carpeted in cream plush, the kind that showed every footprint. William and I climbed without speaking. The crying was louder now, clear, raw. No longer distant or muffled, it was coming from above. The second floor was immaculate. Pale gray walls, white trim, a hallway lined with perfectly straight photos, Amanda and Tyler at their wedding hiking in the mountains, holding champagne on New Year's Eve. Every surface dust-free, but there were no pictures of a child, no toys, no backpack, no sign a little girl lived here. At the end of the hall stood a narrow white door with a brass handle smaller than the rest. Attic access. The crying came from behind it. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. The door opened to reveal a steep staircase disappearing into darkness. The crying stopped. Silence filled the hallway. The tense, waiting silence of a child who hears footsteps and doesn't know if help or harm is coming. "Hello," I called gently. "It's okay. I'm here to help." No answer. I found a switch and flipped it. A single bare bulb flickered on, casting thin yellow light down from above. I climbed the 12 narrow steps, carefully ducking under the low ceiling. The attic was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with sloped walls following the roofline. A dusty window let in a narrow blade of sunlight. The air was suffocating, easily 90 degrees. The house's cool air didn't reach here. It smelled of dust, sweat, and something sour. In the far corner beneath the lowest slope of the ceiling was a small closet. The door was closed. I crossed the attic in 3 strides and paused, hand hovering over the knob. I had opened many doors in 40 years, doors hiding bruises, drugs, frightened children, but never in my own daughter's house. I turned it. The door swung open. She was sitting on the floor, back pressed into the corner, knees drawn to her chest. Tiny. Much too small for 5 or 6. Long blonde hair hung in matted clumps. She wore a stained purple t-shirt and underwear. Her legs were stick-thin knees bruised. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken deep into her skull. But it was her eyes that broke me wide, terrified, the eyes of a child who had stopped believing anyone would come. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, kneeling but keeping my distance. Training took over. "Let the child control contact. My name is Douglas. I'm here to help you." She didn't blink, just stared at me as if I might disappear. "What's your name?" I asked. No answer. The closet was barely 3 feet wide. A thin, stained mattress lay on the floor. A plastic bucket in one corner. Empty water bottles. Granola bar wrappers. A torn, gray, stuffed bunny. This wasn't a closet. It was a cage. I looked back at her face, at her ribs pressing through the fabric at the bruises. "Charlotte," I whispered. Her eyes flickered. "Charlotte," I said again. "I'm your grandfather." She blinked slowly. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Every instinct in me wanted to scoop her up and carry her out. But she was fragile. Any sudden movement might shatter what little trust remained. "I didn't know you were here," I said, voice cracking. "But I'm here now. I'm going to get you out." Behind me, William reached the top of the stairs. I heard his breath catch. "Jesus," he whispered. "Stay with her," I told him quietly. "Don't touch her. Just talk. Keep her calm." "Where are you going?" "To call for help." I dialed 911. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. "This is Douglas Hartman. I'm at 4287 Lakeview Terrace in Edina. I need police and an ambulance. I've found a child locked in an attic. She's alive, but in distress." "Is the child conscious?" "Yes." "Breathing normally?" "Yes." "Severely malnourished. Confined for an extended period." "Are you related to the child?" "She's my granddaughter. And the parents? Out of the country. They left yesterday. Units were 3 minutes away." When I returned upstairs, William was crouched near the closet, talking softly about his dog chasing squirrels. Nonsense, but gentle. Charlotte watched him hollow-eyed, but listening. "They're coming," I said. We waited. 3 minutes stretched into eternity. Then sirens. Footsteps. A paramedic appeared at the attic stairs. "I'm James," he said calmly. "I'm here to help." He knelt at the closet door and spoke softly. "Hi there. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Doctor's food, a soft bed." "Okay." Charlotte stared at him. "Can I carry you?" After a long pause, she nodded. He lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing, 40 pounds at most. He carried her down the narrow stairs, through the hall of perfect photographs, and down to the front door. Outside the street was crowded ambulance lights flashing 2 police cruisers, a sedan, likely from CPS. On the neighboring lawn stood Sharon Griffin, mid-40s, blonde ponytail yoga pants, arms wrapped around herself, crying. James carried Charlotte into the ambulance. A female EMT wrapped her in a blanket and let her sit instead of strapping her down. She stared at the street as if seeing sunlight for the first time. I walked toward Sharon. "I heard her," she said before I spoke. "For months. I thought it was a TV or a neighbor's kid. I thought I was imagining it." "How long?" I asked. 6 months, maybe more. "I should have called. I should have." "Yes," I said quietly, "you should have." She flinched. I turned back to the ambulance. James was checking Charlotte's pulse, shining a light in her eyes. "She's in shock," he told me. "Dehydrated. Malnourished. We're taking her to Children's Minnesota." "You coming?" "I'm her grandfather." He nodded. "Then you know what happens next." "Yeah," I said, "I do." I climbed into the ambulance and sat across from Charlotte. She looked at me with those enormous empty eyes. "You're safe now," I told her. The doors shut. The siren wailed. As we pulled away from 4287 Lakeview Terrace, I looked back at the perfect gray house, the flawless lawn, Sharon sobbing on the sidewalk. My granddaughter had been crying for 6 months, and no one came. The emergency room at Children's Minnesota smelled of antiseptic and fear. I had spent 40 years in places like this, walking abused children through sliding doors holding their hands, while doctors searched for fractures, burns, and worse. But I had never walked in as family, as a grandfather. They wheeled Charlotte in on a gurney, though she was sitting upright, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the fluorescent lights, as if they were something miraculous. A young nurse with kind eyes knelt beside her. "Hi, sweetheart. We're going to take care of you, okay?" Charlotte didn't respond. She just blinked. I tried to follow through the double doors, but an older nurse stopped me gently. "Are you family?" "I'm her grandfather. We need to examine her. About an hour. You can wait in the family room. I'm a retired Hennepin County CPS social worker. 40 years. She studied me, then nodded. "Family room's down the hall. Someone will update you." I wanted to argue, but I knew the protocol. Let the medical team work. So I went to the beige-walled family room with its sagging couches and muted news channel and sat down. Officer Matthew Stevens found me 20 minutes later. Late 30s, shaved head, steady eyes. "Mr. Hartman, I responded to your 911 call." We shook hands. "I need your statement. Start with how you found her." I told him everything: Amanda's call about the tree hiring William Anderson, the crying from the attic, the closet. He wrote quietly. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened when I described the bucket and mattress. "We photographed the scene," he said when I finished. Closet measured roughly 3 by 4 feet. One heavily soiled mattress. Plastic bucket used as a toilet. 6 empty 16-ounce water bottles. 8 granola bar wrappers. 4 apples rotted. 3 stale peanut butter sandwiches. Based on decomposition, food appears placed about 12 days ago. 12 days. Amanda and Tyler left yesterday. That meant Charlotte had been sealed in that attic nearly 2 weeks. The attic temperature was 95 degrees when we arrived. He continued. One small window nailed shut. Single 40-watt bulb. I closed my eyes briefly. "Did you know the child lived there?" he asked. "No. I didn't know she existed." "When did you last see your daughter?" "Over 2 years ago. And yesterday's call. She asked me to arrange tree service. Said they were going out of town." He nodded, closed his notebook. "CPS is en route. Placement will be determined. She's my granddaughter. I'll take her. That'll be up to CPS. But it helps that you're here." "Where are the parents?" "Dubai. We've notified the consulate." Notified. As if this were paperwork, not attempted murder. Emily Richardson arrived an hour later. I recognized her immediately, once a young caseworker I trained, now seasoned, composed. "Douglas," she said quietly. "I wish this were different." She opened her tablet. "How long have you known about Charlotte?" "Since this afternoon." "You didn't know she existed?" "No. I met her once at her father's memorial. After that, Amanda cut contact. And yesterday's call, she mentioned nothing about Charlotte." Emily nodded. "We've confirmed Amanda and her husband flew to Dubai yesterday afternoon. We're working with the consulate to expedite their return." She looked up. "I'm recommending emergency kinship placement. Charlotte would stay with you during the investigation. Are you willing?" "Yes. It's temporary. If the parents contest or another placement is deemed safer." "I understand." She studied me, then nodded. "Given your background, I expect approval by morning. Dr. Laura Anderson found me just after 6 p.m. Early 40s, efficient eyes that had delivered too much bad news. "How is she?" I asked. "Stable, but severely traumatized." "Let's sit." We sat. Charlotte is 5. She weighs 42 pounds. At her age, she should weigh 50 to 55. She's severely malnourished. We started IV fluids and glucose. Her blood sugar was 58. Normal is 70 to 100. Any lower and we'd worry about serious complications. I felt something hollow inside my chest. "How long?" I asked. "Weeks at least. Possibly months." She continued. "She's severely dehydrated. Based on her skin and labs, inadequate water intake for 3 to 4 days. Muscle atrophy in her legs. Vitamin D deficiency consistent with lack of sunlight. severe lice infestation, signs of prolonged confinement, 3 to 4 days without proper water. A 5-year-old rationing 6 bottles across nearly 2 weeks. I've been a pediatric ER physician 15 years, Dr. Morgan said quietly. This is one of the worst neglect cases I've seen. She'll be admitted overnight. Nutrition stabilization observation. Tomorrow she'll see trauma psychology. She's showing signs of PTSD, nonverbal, hypervigilant, minimal eye contact. Can I see her? Yes, briefly. They had moved her to a private room. Dim lights. Soft machine beeps. An IV taped to her thin arm. She clutched the gray stuffed bunny retrieved from the attic. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. I stood in the doorway. Hi, Charlotte. Her gaze shifted toward me. No recognition. No fear, just emptiness. I pulled a chair beside the bed. You're safe now. I'm staying close. She blinked. I'm not going anywhere. No answer. I sat there a long time listening to the steady drip of the IV, thinking about 12 days in 95-degree heat, about stretching water so it wouldn't run out, about a child who learned silence because crying changed nothing. A nurse eventually stepped in. She needs rest. I nodded. I'll be back, I whispered to Charlotte. She didn't respond. I spent the night in the family room, half asleep in a chair, waking every hour. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. Douglas, it's Emily. The judge approved emergency kinship care. Charlotte is placed with you temporarily. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Thank you. There's more. Amanda and Tyler have been notified through the U.S. consulate. They're on the next flight home. The sunrise painted the parking lot pink and gold. When I asked, within 24 to 48 hours, they were coming back. My daughter and her husband. And soon I was going to have to look them in the eye and ask them why. Charlotte came home with me on the morning of July 11th. Home. My 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown, a place she'd never seen. She stood in the middle of the living room, clutching that gray stuffed bunny, and stared at the floor. She hadn't spoken a word since the hospital. Not to the nurses. Not to the doctors. Not to me. I didn't know if she could speak, or if she'd just forgotten how. I knelt down so I was at her eye level. This is where you're going to stay for a while, okay? You'll have your own room, and I'm going to be right here if you need anything. No response, just that blank stare. I showed her the second bedroom, Eleanor's old craft room. There was a bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the street. I'd stopped at Target that morning and bought sheets with butterflies on them, a soft blanket, stuffed animals. It wasn't much, but it was clean, safe, warm. Charlotte walked to the bed, sat down on the edge, and stared at the wall. I stood in the doorway watching her, and I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I'd spent 40 years helping other people's children, writing reports, making recommendations. But I'd never raised a traumatized 5-year-old who wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't look me in the eye. I needed help, and I needed it now. I pulled out my phone and called Catherine Barnes. I'd worked with her over the years. She was a family law attorney, sharp, thorough, someone I trusted. She answered on the 3rd ring. Catherine Barnes. Catherine, it's Douglas Hartman. I need a lawyer. Her office was downtown on the 15th floor of a glass high-rise with a view of the Mississippi River. Catherine met me at the door. She was in her early 50s with short auburn hair going gray at the temples and the kind of calm, assessing gaze that comes from decades of hearing terrible stories. I told her everything. My daughter called me about a tree. I hired a tree service. The tree guy heard crying. I went to the house. Found my granddaughter locked in an attic closet. 5 years old, malnourished, dehydrated. I called 911. CPS gave me emergency kinship care. And now my daughter and her husband are flying back from Dubai, and I need to make sure they never get near that child again. Catherine took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me. How long has your granddaughter been living with your daughter? I don't know. I didn't know she existed until 2 days ago. Her eyebrows rose. You didn't know? No. Amanda never told me. I saw Charlotte once 3 years ago at her father's memorial service. She was 2. After that, nothing. Catherine nodded slowly. Here's what we're looking at. You have emergency kinship care, which is temporary. Within 72 hours of the parent's return, there will be a first hearing. The judge will decide whether to extend temporary custody to you, return the child to the parents, or place her in foster care. She's not going into foster care. I agree. And she's definitely not going back to them. But we need to build an airtight case. Medical records, police reports, witness testimony, everything that proves the child was abused and that you're the best placement. What do you need from me? First, a timeline. When did your daughter call you? When did you go to the house? When did you find the child? Write it down. Dates, times, every detail. I can do that. One second, I'll need authorization to request medical records from Children's Minnesota and the police report from Minneapolis PD. I'll sign whatever you need. Third, we need a witness. You said a tree service guy heard the crying. William Anderson, he's the one who called me. I'll need his contact information. He'll be key. I nodded. Catherine leaned back in her chair. Douglas, I need to be honest. This is going to be expensive. My retainer is $10,500. That covers about 25 hours. After that, it's $425 an hour. If this goes to trial, you're looking at $30,000, maybe $40,000 total. I didn't hesitate. I'll pay it. Do you have the resources? I have savings. And if I run out, I'll sell my apartment. Whatever it takes. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, Catherine walked me through the strategy. Here's what we're building, a narrative. Step 1, establish the abuse. Medical records prove severe malnutrition, dehydration, PTSD. Police report proves confinement. Step 2, establish that you didn't know. CPS report confirms you had no prior knowledge of the child's existence. You're a rescuer, not an enabler. Step 3, establish your suitability as a guardian. You're a retired social worker with 40 years of experience. Stable housing, stable income, blood family. You're the textbook definition of an appropriate kinship placement. And what about Amanda? Catherine's expression hardened. Step 4, establish that the parents are unfit. We'll have to prove your daughter knowingly confined and neglected the child, that she prioritized a vacation over her daughter's safety, that she's a danger. I felt something twist in my chest. Amanda at 6 asking me to tell her stories. Amanda at 16 crying on my shoulder. Amanda at 23 walking down the aisle. And then Amanda at 32 locking her daughter in a closet and leaving her to starve. I can do that, I said. I signed the retainer agreement and wrote a check for $10,500. Catherine filed it and extended her hand. You're officially my client. One more thing. Douglas, this is going to get ugly. Your daughter will fight. She'll say she didn't know how bad it was. She'll say it was her husband's idea. And you'll have to sit in that courtroom and testify against her. You'll have to say under oath that your own daughter is unfit to be a mother. Are you ready for that? I thought about Amanda at 6 years old. Her gap-toothed smile. Her absolute faith that her daddy could fix anything. And then I thought about Charlotte at 5 years old, sitting in a closet in the dark, wondering if anyone would ever come. I've been ready for 40 years, I said. The first night Charlotte screamed. I was in my bedroom when I heard the sound. High, thin. The sound of a child who'd learned that screaming doesn't bring help but screams anyway. I ran. Down the hall, bare feet on hardwood, heart hammering. Threw open the door. Charlotte was on the floor, curled into a ball in the corner as far from the bed as she could get. Her hands covered her head. Her body shook. Charlotte. I knelt beside her. didn't touch. It's okay. You're safe. It's just a dream. She didn't look up, just kept shaking. I sat down on the floor next to her. Not close, just close enough that she'd know I was there. You don't have to get back in the bed. You can sleep wherever you want. I'll stay right here. It took 20 minutes for her breathing to slow, for her hands to drop, for her to uncurl just slightly and look at me with those hollow eyes. I pulled the blanket and pillow off the bed and set them on the floor next to her. Here. You can sleep here tonight. She stared at the blanket, then slowly pulled it over herself. I stayed, sat against the wall and watched her until her eyes closed, until her breathing evened out, until I was sure she was asleep. The next day I found granola bars under her pillow. I'd made breakfast, eggs, toast, orange juice, and set it in front of her. She'd stared at it, took one bite of toast, left the rest. An hour later, I went to make her bed and found them. 3 granola bars, hidden under the pillow, still in their wrappers. I stood there holding them and felt something cold settle in my chest. She was hoarding food. Because she thought it would disappear. Because in that attic, food did disappear. I put the granola bars back under the pillow. That afternoon, I said loud enough for Charlotte to hear. Charlotte, there's food on the counter. Crackers, fruit, juice boxes. It's always going to be there. You don't have to hide it. Okay. No answer. But when I checked later, 2 crackers were gone. And the next morning, I found them in her sock drawer. On the 3rd day, I made pancakes. Eleanor's recipe. Blueberry. The kind I used to make for Amanda on Saturday mornings when she was little. Charlotte was standing in the doorway watching me. I'd learned to narrate what I was doing. I'm making pancakes. Blueberry. Your grandma's recipe. Charlotte didn't respond, but she edged closer. I flipped a pancake. Do you like pancakes? She didn't answer. I put 2 pancakes on a plate, added butter-drizzled syrup in a smiley face, set it on the table. Didn't force. Didn't hover. Just sat down across from her with my own plate and started eating. For a long time, she just stood there, staring at the plate. Then slowly she climbed into the chair, picked up the fork, took one bite, and then another, and then she smiled. It was small, fleeting, but it was real. A smile. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just smiled back and said, "Good, right." She took another bite. The next morning she spoke. I was in the kitchen making coffee. Charlotte was in the doorway. Always the doorway, never fully in the room, never fully out, clutching her bunny. I turned and saw her, standing there, staring at me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Grandpa, the word was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. A whisper. Barely more than a breath. I froze, set down the coffee mug. Yes, sweetheart. Her eyes were wide, scared. Can I have pancakes? I felt something crack open in my chest. 4 days of silence, of hollow eyes and hidden granola bars and screaming in the night. And now this. 2 sentences. Grandpa, can I have pancakes? Yeah, baby, I said, and my voice broke. You can have pancakes. She ate 2 pancakes that morning. And I made a silent promise to Eleanor, wherever she was, I'll figure this out. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out. That afternoon, Catherine called. Douglas, how's it going? I was sitting on the couch, exhausted. Charlotte was on the floor 3 feet away, lining up her stuffed animals. She wouldn't let me out of her sight. Fine, I lied. You sound exhausted. When's the last time you slept through the night? I didn't answer. You're 67 years old. You can't keep doing this. I know someone. Dorothy Wilson, retired elementary school teacher. She does respite care, 3 days a week. Just a few hours. Enough to give you a break. I looked at Charlotte, at the way she glanced over her shoulder every few seconds to make sure I was still there. 3 days a week, I said. That's all. Dorothy Wilson arrived at 9 o'clock on the morning of July 14th. When the doorbell rang, Charlotte ran to my side and grabbed my hand. I opened the door. Dorothy was 71 with white hair pulled back in a neat bun, a cardigan sensible shoes, and a smile that reached her eyes. Douglas, I'm Dorothy. And you must be Charlotte. Charlotte hid behind my leg. Dorothy sat down on the floor and pulled out a book. Where the Wild Things Are. She started reading. Calm. Unhurried. After 5 minutes, Charlotte peeked around my leg. After 10 minutes, she took a step closer. After 20 minutes, she was sitting next to Dorothy, staring at the pictures. And by the time Dorothy finished the story, Charlotte said, "Can you read it again?" I stood watching them, watching my granddaughter lean against this stranger's shoulder and listen to a story. And I felt relief, but I also felt grief, because Charlotte was learning to trust again. Learning that not every adult would hurt her, but she'd never trust her mother. Not after this. And I was the one who was going to make sure of that. On the morning of July 15th, while Charlotte and Dorothy sat on the living room floor, building a tower out of wooden blocks, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything I remembered. Dates, times, conversations, the call from Amanda, the tree, William's voice on the phone, the attic, the closet, Charlotte's hollow eyes. Catherine had said, "Write it down every detail because details win cases." So I wrote, June 25th. HOA violation notice issued. July 8th, 9 a.m. Amanda calls, asks me to arrange tree service, says she and Tyler leaving for vacation. July 9th, voice tight, rushed. July 9th, 2 p.m. William Anderson arrives, hears crying through attic window, calls me. I filled 3 pages front and back, every conversation, every detail I could remember. When I was done, I took a photo with my phone and texted it to Catherine. Her reply came 5 minutes later. Perfect, this is exactly what I need. Catherine worked fast. By the afternoon of July 16th, she'd already assembled half the case. She called me from her office, told me she'd pulled the HOA records from Medina. 2 violation notices first. One dated June 25th, 2nd, one July 1st, final warning. $350 fine if the tree wasn't trimmed by July 15th. That was the day after they left, which corroborated my timeline. Amanda called me July 8th, 1 week before the deadline, and left the country the next day. She knew the tree had to be dealt with, but she didn't deal with it herself. She asked me to handle it, and then she left. And left Charlotte locked in the attic. The medical records arrived that afternoon. 23 pages printed on hospital letterhead, signed by Dr. Laura Anderson. I sat on the couch and read them every word. Patient Charlotte Hartman, age 5 years, 11 months. At time of admission, chief complaint, severe malnutrition, dehydration, suspected abuse. Weight 42 pounds, expected 50 to 55 pounds, for age blood glucose. 58 hypoglycemia, evidence of long-term confinement, muscle atrophy, vitamin D deficiency, lice infestation, poor hygiene. Patient found locked in attic closet by grandfather. Estimated confinement, extended period weeks to months. Food and water, limited 6 water bottles, 8 granola bars, 4 apples rotten. 3 sandwiches, stale, temperature in attic 95 degrees, no ventilation. Diagnosis, severe malnutrition, dehydration, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'd read the report before at the hospital, when Dr. Morgan first explained Charlotte's condition. But reading it now in legal language with every detail documented and numbered felt different, colder, more final. Every sentence was a weapon, every number was ammunition. On July 17th, Catherine interviewed William Anderson. She called me afterward, told me he was perfect. Calm, clear, detail-oriented, no connection to me or the family, except the professional relationship, an independent witness with no motive to lie. He was hired to trim a tree, He arrived at 2 p.m. on July 9th. He climbed the ladder to reach the upper branches, and he heard a child crying faint coming from the attic. He tried to look through the window, but it was too dusty, so he called me. And when I arrived, we entered the house together, went upstairs, and found Charlotte locked in a closet. Now we had it under oath signed affidavit he'd testify in court if we needed him, and the other side couldn't challenge his credibility. The police report came next. 14 pages with photographs attached. Officer Matthew Stevens had been thorough. Crime scene photos, exterior of house attic, access, attic, interior, closet, door, open closet, interior. Evidence log plastic bucket used as toilet, 6 empty water bottles. 8 granola bar wrappers, 4 apples rotten, decomposed, 3 sandwiches, peanut butter stale, partially consumed. 1 stuffed animal gray rabbit soiled, 1 thin mattress heavily stained with urine. Environmental conditions, temperature at time of discovery, 95 degrees, humidity, 62% ventilation. None window, 12 by 18 inches, sealed, dusty. Lighting, single 40-watt bulb. Closet dimensions, 3 feet wide by 4 feet deep by 6 feet tall. I stared at the photos, the closet, the mattress, the bucket, the empty water bottles lined up in a row like soldiers. Charlotte had arranged them, put them in order because even at 5 years old, even locked in a closet in the dark, she'd tried to maintain some sense of control. I closed the folder, couldn't look anymore. On the evening of July 17th, Catherine sent me a text. Sharon Griffin gave a statement, you should read it. I called her, asked what she said. She heard crying for months. She's not sure how long, maybe 6 months. Maybe more. She thought it was a TV at first, or a neighbor's kid playing. She says she almost called the police a few times, but she talked herself out of it, thought she was overreacting. Her testimony proved long-term abuse, proved Charlotte was in that attic for months, not days. On the afternoon of July 18th, Catherine called again, told me she'd found something. Amanda and Tyler's flight records. She had a contact at the airline pull them. They were originally booked to return July 18th, 3 days after they left short trip, but they changed it to July 25th, rescheduled, extended the trip by a week. They weren't rushing home. They knew Charlotte was in that attic. They knew she had limited food and water, and they extended their vacation. They're not coming back. Because they're worried, Catherine said, her voice hard. They're coming back because they got caught. I looked through the doorway at Charlotte sitting on the couch next to Dorothy, listening to a story, her face calm, safe. Catherine's voice came through the phone. July 21st, first hearing, 10 a.m. Hennepin County Family Court. Are you ready? I looked at Charlotte, at the little girl who'd spent 6 months locked in a closet, who'd rationed water, who'd screamed, and no one came. I'm ready, I said. I was making dinner when my phone lit up with a news alert. Spaghetti and garlic bread, simple and safe because Charlotte still barely ate, and I had learned not to overwhelm her with choices. She was in the living room, 3 feet from the kitchen doorway, watching cartoons on the small TV I had set up that morning. She always kept me in sight. If I stepped into the bathroom, she waited outside. If I walked to my bedroom for a sweater, she followed. So when my phone buzzed on the counter, I expected spam. Instead, I saw a headline, local influencer arrested in child abuse case. Below it was a photo of Tyler Vaughn in handcuffs at a bright airport terminal flanked by officers. His face was twisted in anger or shock. Beside him stood Amanda, head bowed, hair hiding her face. I picked up the phone and stared at the screen. My hands did not shake. 40 years of crisis work teaches you how to absorb impact without showing it. You learn to keep your voice level in hospital corridors and courthouse hallways. You learn not to flinch, but inside something cracked. I turned off the screen and slipped the phone into my pocket. Charlotte did not need to see that. Dinner's almost ready, sweetheart, I called. From the living room came a small voice. Okay, Grandpa. 15 minutes later, Catherine called. I stepped into the hallway far enough that Charlotte would not overhear, but close enough that she would not panic. They're in custody, she said. When landed at 4:47, arrested at 4:52. Officer Stevens was there. Tyler tried to run, made it 20 feet before they tackled him. Amanda didn't resist. She just cried. I leaned against the wall and pictured it, the polished floors, the fluorescent lights, strangers filming with their phones. Charges, I asked. 3 counts each. Felony child abuse, felony neglect, felony false imprisonment. Bail $75,000 apiece. A no-contact order has been issued. They cannot see or contact Charlotte. Good, I said, and heard the hardness in my own voice. You okay, Douglas? I'm fine. She hesitated. It's still your daughter. Yeah. The arraignment is tomorrow. You don't have to attend. The custody hearing is July 21st. That one matters. I'll be there. After I hung up, Charlotte called from the living room. Grandpa. I walked back in. Yeah, baby. Is dinner ready? I glanced at the calendar on the wall. July 15th. And then it hit me. It was Charlotte's birthday. In 6 days of hospitals and lawyers and paperwork and exhaustion, I had forgotten that my granddaughter was turning 6. 6 years old, and she had spent the last year locked in a closet. I opened the cabinet and found a box of pancake mix. It wasn't a cake. There were no balloons or wrapped presents. But it was something. 20 minutes later, I called her into the kitchen. She stood in the doorway, clutching her bunny, watching cautiously. On the table sat a stack of blueberry pancakes, and in the center of the top one, a single lit candle. Her eyes widened. I knelt down. Do you know what today is? She shook her head. Today is your birthday. You're 6. She stared at the candle, as if the concept itself was unfamiliar. It's okay, I said softly. We're going to celebrate. Just you and me. I sang happy birthday, my voice catching on the words. For a long moment she stood frozen. Then slowly she smiled. Not the tentative flicker I had seen before. This one reached her eyes. It was small, fragile, but real. Make a wish, I told her. She leaned forward, closed her eyes, and blew out the candle. I did not ask what she wished for. I already knew. Safety. Love. A place to belong. That night, after she fell asleep on the floor beside her bed, still unable to sleep in it, still needing proximity, I opened my laptop in the living room. The story was everywhere. Local stations, state news, even national outlets. Fitness influencer accused of locking daughter in attic. The photo of Tyler in handcuffs had been shared thousands of times. I scrolled through the comments. There were thousands. Lock them up and throw away the key. How does a mother do that? He built a brand on strength while starving a child. I hope they rot in prison. The outrage was loud and relentless, and justified. They had locked a 5-year-old in a closet and left the country while she rationed water in 95-degree heat. But the strangers did not know Amanda the way I did. They did not know the gap-toothed 6-year-old who climbed into my lap with picture books. They did not know the teenager who cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak. They did not know the bride who looked back at me down the aisle with gratitude in her eyes. They saw a monster. Maybe that is what she had become. But I saw my daughter, and I saw my failure, because I raised her. I taught her about protecting the vulnerable. I told her stories about the children I helped, about standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. Somewhere along the way, something in her twisted or broke, and I do not know when it happened. I do not know what I missed. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark apartment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city traffic. In the next room, Charlotte slept safe and warm for the first time in her life. Today was her 6th birthday. For the first time, she had blown out a candle in a room where no one meant her harm. It had taken her mother's arrest to make that possible. Relief and heartbreak lived side by side in my chest, impossible to separate. The Hennepin County Courthouse was downtown, a 10-minute drive from my apartment. Catherine drove. I sat in the passenger seat, hands in my lap, staring at nothing. "You ready?" she asked as we pulled into the parking garage. I didn't answer, because I wasn't ready. But I was going anyway. We walked through security. Metal detectors, ID check. Catherine's briefcase searched, then up the elevator to the 3rd floor. Family court. The hallway was crowded. Lawyers in suits, families waiting on benches, a few reporters with notepads lingering near the doors. And at the far end of the hall I saw them, Amanda, Tyler. Standing with their lawyer, a man in his mid-40s, gray suit, silver tie, holding a leather portfolio. Jeffrey Mason. I'd looked him up. 20 years as a defense attorney, specialized in family law, good reputation, expensive. Amanda saw me. Our eyes met across the hallway. Hers were red, swollen, like she'd been crying for days. She opened her mouth, like she wanted to say something. I looked away. "Come on," Catherine said quietly, guiding me toward the courtroom doors. Judge Lawrence Mitchell was 60 years old, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from decades of hearing terrible stories. He sat at the bench reading a file as we took our seats. I didn't look around, didn't take in the room, just focused on the judge, on Catherine beside me, on staying calm. The bailiff called the case. In the matter of Charlotte Hartman, petitioner Douglas Hartman, respondents Amanda Crawford and Tyler Vaughn, the judge looked up. "Counsel, state your appearances." The assistant district attorney, a woman in her 30s, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, stood. "Rachel Winters for the state, Your Honor." Jeffrey Mason stood. "Jeffrey Mason for the respondents, Your Honor." Catherine stood. "Catherine Barnes for the petitioner Douglas Hartman." Judge Mitchell nodded. "Ms. Winters, you may proceed." The prosecution was brief, efficient. Ms. Winters summarized the facts. Child found locked in attic closet July 9th. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, evidence of long-term confinement. Parents out of country at time of discovery. Then she called Dr. Laura Anderson. Dr. Anderson was 50 years old, calm and professional in a Navy suit. She took the witness stand and was sworn in. "Dr. Anderson, Ms. Winters said, you evaluated Charlotte Hartman on July 9th at Children's Minnesota Hospital, correct?" "Yes." "Can you describe her condition?" Charlotte presented with severe malnutrition, dehydration, and symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. She was nonverbal hypervigilant and exhibited signs of prolonged psychological trauma. "Can you elaborate on the malnutrition?" "Her weight was significantly below the expected range for her age. There was evidence of muscle atrophy and vitamin deficiencies, consistent with inadequate nutrition over an extended period." And the PTSD. Charlotte displayed classic symptoms: inability to make eye contact, extreme fearfulness, difficulty trusting adults. "In my professional assessment, these symptoms are the result of sustained abuse and neglect." Ms. Winters nodded. "How long will recovery take?" 2 years. "With consistent therapy and a stable, nurturing environment, Charlotte can heal. But the trauma she's experienced will have long-term effects." "Thank you, doctor." I sat there listening, my hands gripped together in my lap. Every word was true. Every word was a knife. Jeffrey Mason stood for the defense. "Your Honor, my clients do not dispute that their daughter was found in distressing circumstances. However, this was a tragic misunderstanding. Mrs. Crawford was under significant psychological pressure from Mr. Vaughn, who manipulated her into believing that confining the child was necessary for discipline. My clients are willing to participate in family therapy and parenting classes. We request supervised visitation and a path toward reunification." I wanted to stand up, to shout, to say she locked her daughter in a closet for 12 days and left the country. That's not a misunderstanding, but I stayed silent. Catherine had told me, "Let the facts speak." Judge Mitchell set down his pen, looked at Jeffrey Mason for a long moment. "Ma counselor." The judge said, his voice cold. "I've read the reports. I've seen the photographs. This was not a misunderstanding. This was child abuse. Severe, prolonged, and premeditated." He turned to Douglas. "Mr. Hartman, you are granted temporary guardianship of Charlotte Hartman. The no-contact order will remain in effect. The respondents are prohibited from any contact with the child. No visits, no calls, no letters. A full custody hearing will be scheduled within 60 days. Until then, Charlotte remains with her grandfather." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." Outside, the cameras were everywhere. Catherine gripped my arm as we pushed through the courthouse doors. Reporters swarmed. Microphones, cameras, voices shouting over each other. "Mr. Hartman, how is Charlotte doing? Are you seeking permanent custody? Do you have a statement?" Catherine pulled me forward. "Don't say anything, just walk." I kept my head down, focused on the car, on getting away. But I saw them. Amanda and Tyler exiting through a side door flanked by 2 officers. Amanda's head was down. Tyler's face was hard, angry. A reporter pushed closer. "Mr. Hartman, do you think your daughter should go to prison?" I didn't answer. Just got in Catherine's car, sat in the passenger seat, stared straight ahead as she pulled out of the parking lot. "By tonight," Catherine said quietly, "this will be everywhere. Local news, state news, maybe national. Charlotte's story is out." I looked back at the courthouse, at the cameras, at the reporters still filming, at the strangers who thought they knew my family, and I thought, good. Let them know. Let everyone know what Amanda did. I woke on July 20th to 47 missed calls. My phone buzzed so hard it had slid off the nightstand. I picked it up, squinting at the screen in the early morning light. The first headline read, "Fitness influencer charged with locking daughter in attic." Below it, a photo of Tyler in handcuffs at the airport. His jaw clenched, his eyes furious. Amanda stood beside him, her face half hidden by her hair. I set the phone down and listened. In the next room, Charlotte was still asleep. I could hear her soft breathing through the half-open door. I made coffee in the dim kitchen and began to read. By mid-morning, the story was everywhere. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune ran it as the lead on their homepage. WCCO opened their noon broadcast with a live shot from outside the Hennepin County Jail. Fox 9 sent a reporter to stand in front of Amanda's house in Edina, narrating in front of the same window where William had heard Charlotte's cry 11 days earlier. The camera panned across the trimmed lawn, the neat flower beds, the dark attic window. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. That was the part people couldn't understand. My phone rang constantly. Journalists, producers, people I hadn't spoken to in years. A woman from a national morning show left a voicemail asking if I would appear on camera. "America wants to hear your story," she said. I deleted it. Catherine called at 10:30, told me not to answer any of them. Let the case speak for itself. I told her I had no intention of speaking. She paused. Said they're tearing Tyler apart online and it's going to get uglier. She was right. Over the next 3 days, I watched Tyler's social media account collapse in real time. On July 19th, the day of the hearing, he had 64,000 followers. By July 22nd, he had 8,000. Catherine sent me screenshots. The comments on his last post, a photo of him lifting weights in a gym in Dubai, captioned, "Discipline is freedom, we're vicious. You're a monster. How could you do this to a child? I hope you rot in prison." I didn't disagree with them, but reading hundreds of strangers rage felt strange, like watching a wildfire consume a forest from a safe distance. The brand deals vanished overnight. A major athletic company pulled his sponsorship on July 21st. Their statement was brief and cold. We do not condone the alleged actions of this individual and have terminated our partnership effective immediately. A supplement brand that had paid Tyler to promote their protein powder issued a similar statement the same day. By July 23rd, his professional life had been erased. Amanda's account went private on July 21st. Her last public post from early June showed her smiling in front of a palm tree somewhere in Dubai. The caption read, "Family is everything." The replies beneath it were now full of fury and disbelief. Where was your daughter? You don't deserve to call yourself a mother. How do you sleep at night? I wondered the same thing. By July 25th, the story had spread beyond Minnesota. I caught a reference to it on a cable news segment while I was making Charlotte lunch. The anchor called it a shocking case of influencer negligence and alleged abuse. I turned off the television before Charlotte could hear. She was sitting at the kitchen table coloring a picture of a butterfly with a purple crayon. She didn't know that her face, pixelated, thankfully had been shown on the news that morning. She didn't know that thousands of people across the country were arguing about her mother online, and I intended to keep it that way. Catherine called again on July 27th, told me Jeffrey Mason put out a statement. Jeffrey Mason was Amanda and Tyler's defense attorney, a man in his mid-40s with slicked back hair and an expensive suit. He's asking for privacy and claiming Amanda was manipulated by Tyler, Catherine said. I asked if anyone believed it. She laughed bitterly, said no. The bail hearing's been postponed because of the public outcry. The judge doesn't want a circus in his courtroom. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. A circus. That's what this had become. Not a criminal case, not a family tragedy, but a spectacle. People who had never met Charlotte, who had never seen the closet she had been locked in, were posting essays online about what should happen to Amanda and Tyler. But I didn't call anyone. I stayed home with Charlotte. I made her meals, read her stories, sat beside her when she woke up crying in the middle of the night. The world outside was loud and angry and desperate for answers, but inside my apartment, we were quiet. On July 30th, Catherine called one last time that week. Her voice was quieter than usual, and I knew before she spoke that something had changed. Douglas, we've uncovered something new. Documents Amanda signed 2 years ago, financial records. It's worse than we thought. I asked what she meant. She paused. I'll explain when we meet. But this wasn't just neglect, Douglas. This was a plan. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Charlotte was stacking blocks on the living room floor, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Somewhere in a cell in Hennepin County, my daughter was waiting for her next court date. Somewhere online, thousands of people were still arguing about what she had done, but they didn't know why. Not yet. Catherine arrived at my apartment on the afternoon of August 5th with a file folder thick enough to stop a door. She set it on my kitchen table without saying hello, without asking how Charlotte was doing, without any of the usual pleasantries. Her face was tight, her jaw set. I knew before she opened her mouth that whatever was inside that folder was going to change everything. Sit down, Douglas, she said. I sat. She opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward me. It was a power of attorney document dated April 10th, 2023. My name was printed at the top. Below it, a signature that looked almost like mine, almost, but not quite. The loops were too wide, the slant too steep. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding in my ears. I never signed this, I said. I know, Catherine replied. We had it analyzed by a forensic document examiner yesterday. It's a forgery. I looked up at her. Amanda did this. Amanda and Tyler, she said. She pulled out another document, a notarization certificate signed by someone named Elizabeth Morris, a notary public in Hennepin County. Morris is 44 years old, works part-time as a mobile notary. She's also a member of the same gym Tyler goes to in Edina. We subpoenaed her bank records. On April 9th, she deposited $2,000 in cash. The next day, she notarized this document. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They bribed her. Yes, Catherine's voice was steady, but I could hear the anger beneath it. And they did it 3 months before they locked Charlotte in that attic. She spread more papers across the table, printouts of text messages, bank statements, calendar entries. Catherine pointed to one dated March 12th, a text from Tyler to Amanda. The message read, "Talk to a guy at the gym about nursing homes. There's one in Bloomington that takes Medicaid. If we can get him declared incompetent, they'll take him. Then we sell the condo." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. "They were planning to put me in a home," I said quietly. "They were planning to take everything you own," Catherine corrected. "Your condo in Uptown is worth approximately $450,000. You have $82,000 in savings and retirement accounts. Combined, that's $532,000. If Amanda had legal authority over your finances, if this power of attorney had been accepted as legitimate, she and Tyler could have sold your home, drained your accounts, and placed you in a state facility. You would have had no say in any of it." I felt the room tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. And Charlotte, Catherine's expression darkened. Charlotte was in the way. If they were going to execute this plan, they couldn't have a 6-year-old child around asking questions. So they hid her. She slid another document across the table, an email printed on plain white paper. The subject line read, "Endgame." It was dated June 2nd, 2023, 5 weeks before William heard Charlotte's cry. The sender was Tyler. The recipient was Amanda. I began to read. Before I reveal what was in this email, the email that completely changed how I saw my own daughter, I need to know you're still here, still listening to my story. Comment the number 11 if you think Amanda was just a victim being manipulated. Or comment the number 22 if you believe she knew exactly what she was doing. I need to know you're still with me, because what I'm about to read, it won't be easy to hear. And please note, the following part of this story contains elements that have been reconstructed for educational purposes and may not fully reflect every detail if this makes you uncomfortable. You're welcome to stop here. Now let me read you the endgame email. A. We're almost there. POA is solid. Morris won't talk. Once we're back from Dubai, we create the incident. You call Adult Protective Services, say he's confused, not eating, leaving the stove on, whatever. They do a welfare check. He gets evaluated, we get conservatorship. House sells in 30 days, maybe less in this market. We're in Scottsdale by September. C stays upstairs until we leave. No one will know. 2. I read it 3 times. The words didn't blur, they didn't soften, they sat on the page, cold and precise, like instructions for assembling furniture. They were going to leave her there, I said. My voice sounded far away. They were going to sell my house and move to Arizona and leave Charlotte locked in that attic. That's what we believe, Catherine said quietly. We think they intended to abandon her. Whether they planned to call someone anonymously or simply leave her there for the next owner to find, we don't know. But Douglas, they were willing to let her starve. I set the email down. My hands were shaking. Catherine pulled out one more document. We've filed additional charges. Forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Elizabeth Morris has been charged as an accomplice. The district attorney is pushing for maximum sentences on all counts. I looked at her. Good. She nodded. The preliminary hearing is set for September 12th. Amanda's lawyer is going to fight this. He'll argue that Tyler coerced her, that she didn't know the full extent of the plan. But we have the emails, Douglas, we have the texts. We have her signature on the fake POA. She knew. I thought about my daughter, about the girl I had raised, the girl Eleanor had rocked to sleep, the girl who used to sit on the porch steps and tell me about her day at school. I didn't recognize her anymore. Prosecute her on every count, I said. My voice was steady now. I want her to answer for all of it. Catherine closed the folder. We will. After she left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the email printout. Charlotte was in the living room, building a tower out of wooden blocks, humming softly to herself. She didn't know that her mother had planned to erase me, didn't know that she had been a loose end in someone else's financial scheme. But I knew, and I would make sure a jury knew too. The report arrived on September 12th, delivered by courier in a manila envelope with Dr. Laura Anderson's return address printed in the corner. I signed for it at the door, carried it to the kitchen table, and sat down. The envelope wasn't sealed, just held shut by a metal clasp. I opened it and pulled out a document 42 pages long, bound with a black plastic comb. The title page read, Psychological Evaluation of Minor Child. Charlotte Marie Hartman. Evaluator Laura Anderson, Psy, D-Date, September 10th, 2023. I had been waiting for this report for weeks. Catherine had told me it was coming, that it would be thorough, that it would be hard to read. She had warned me not to read it alone. I read it alone anyway. The first few pages were procedural dates of evaluation sessions, testing instruments used, background information. Dr. Anderson had met with Charlotte 6 times over the course of August, each session lasting between 60 and 90 minutes. She had conducted play therapy, administered standardized assessments, reviewed medical records from Children's Minnesota, and interviewed me, Dorothy Wilson, and Emily Richardson from Child Protective Services. The methodology was sound. The findings were devastating. I turned to page 6 and stopped. Evidence of prolonged psychological torture. I read the sentence 3 times. The words were clinical, precise, the kind of language I had written myself 100 times in case files over the years. But this was Charlotte. This was my granddaughter, and the torture had been administered by my daughter. Dr. Anderson's report outlined Charlotte's symptoms in careful detail. Post-traumatic stress disorder, severe. Nightmares occurring 4 to 5 times per week, characterized by themes of entrapment, darkness, and abandonment. Hypervigilance. Charlotte, startled at loud noises, monitored the location of adults in the room, checked doors and windows repeatedly to ensure they were not locked. Food hoarding. She hid granola bars under her pillow, crackers in her sock drawer, a banana behind the bookshelf in the living room. When I found the banana 3 days later, brown and soft, I didn't throw it away in front of her. I waited until she was asleep. The report described her attachment patterns as profoundly disrupted. She did not seek comfort when distressed. She did not make eye contact during moments of emotional intensity. She had learned, Dr. Anderson wrote, that adults were not safe, that her needs would not be met, that crying brought no help. At 6 years old, she had already internalized the belief that she was alone in the world. I had to stop reading. I stood up, poured a glass of water, drank it at the sink. Through the doorway, I could see Charlotte sitting on the living room floor, arranging her stuffed animals in a line. She was humming again, the same tuneless melody she had hummed for days. I watched her for a moment, then sat back down and kept reading. Page 12 detailed her developmental delays. Her language skills were 18 months behind her peers. She spoke in short, simple sentences, 3 or 4 words at most. She rarely asked questions. She did not tell stories. Dr. Anderson had administered the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test and found that Charlotte's receptive vocabulary was at the level of a 4-year-old. Her social skills had regressed even further. She did not initiate play with other children. She did not understand turn-taking, sharing, or cooperative games. When Dorothy brought her to a small playgroup at the community center in late August, Charlotte had stood against the wall for 40 minutes, watching the other children but never joining them. I thought about the 2 years Amanda and Tyler had kept her hidden. 2 years of isolation, of silence, of a world that began and ended in a single room. 2 years of learning that people were dangerous, that asking for things led to nothing, that the safest strategy was to disappear. Charlotte had survived, but she had paid for that survival with pieces of herself she might never get back. The long-term prognosis section began on page 37. Dr. Anderson was careful, measured. She wrote that with consistent therapy, a stable home environment, and trauma-informed care, Charlotte could make significant progress. She could learn to trust again. She could develop healthier attachment patterns. She could over time begin to heal. But the damage was deep. The neural pathways formed in early childhood, the ones that taught a child the world was safe, that adults could be trusted, that her needs mattered, had been warped. Some of that could be repaired. Some of it could not. This child, Dr. Anderson wrote on page 40, will carry these scars for the rest of her life. I read that sentence and felt something crack open in my chest. Not anger this time. Not shock. Just grief, vast and heavy, settling into my bones. I thought about Eleanor, about how she used to say that some things couldn't be fixed, only survived. I thought about the 40 years I had spent as a social worker, writing reports like this one, sitting across from parents in courtrooms and offices and hospital waiting rooms, explaining that their children had been hurt in ways that would never fully heal. I had written those words dozens of times. I had never understood them until now. The final page of the report contained Dr. Anderson's recommendation that Charlotte remain in my care, that she continue weekly therapy with a trauma specialist, that she be monitored for signs of depression and anxiety as she grew older. The evaluation had been court-ordered, which meant the defense could not challenge its findings. Amanda's lawyer could not argue that Charlotte was fine, that the damage was exaggerated, that time would smooth everything over. The evidence was here, 42 pages of it, typed and bound and undeniable. I closed the folder and sat in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. In the living room, Charlotte lined up her stuffed animals and began to hum again. I thought about the sentencing hearing still weeks away. I thought about standing in that courtroom and watching the judge hand down whatever sentence the law allowed. And I knew even then that no sentence would be enough. No number of years could undo what had been done. No punishment could give Charlotte back the childhood she had lost. But it was all we had. The meeting took place on October 3rd in a conference room on the 7th floor of the Hennepin County Government Center. Catherine had called me 2 days earlier to say that Jeffrey Mason wanted to talk. He's going to offer a deal. She said you need to be there. I told her I would be. The room was small and windowless, lit by overhead fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. When I arrived, Catherine was already seated on one side, a legal pad and 2 pens arranged neatly in front of her. Across from her sat Jeffrey Mason, Amanda and Tyler's defense attorney, and Rachel Winters, the assistant district attorney, who had been handling the prosecution since July. Mason was in his mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked expensive. He nodded at me when I walked in, but didn't stand. I sat down next to Catherine. Mason opened a folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "We'd like to propose a plea agreement," he said. His voice was calm, professional. "My clients are willing to plead guilty to the primary charges, child endangerment, neglect, and unlawful restraint, in exchange for the dismissal of the forgery and elder exploitation charges, and a reduced sentencing recommendation." I looked at the paper. It was a summary typed in neat columns. Amanda Crawford, 6 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 4. Tyler Vaughn, 8 years, eligible after 5. Restitution reduced from $532,000 to $20,000. All financial crimes dropped. Catherine leaned forward. "What's the state's position?" Rachel Winters folded her hands on the table. "We're inclined to accept. The primary charges carry significant sentences, and a guilty plea avoids the risk of trial. If we go to trial and lose on any count, the sentences could be lighter. This way, we guarantee prison time." "Guaranteed prison time," I repeated. My voice sounded flat even to myself. "Yes," Rachel said. She looked at me directly. "Mr. Hartman, I understand this is difficult, but a trial is unpredictable. Juries are unpredictable. Defense counsel will argue that Amanda was coerced by Tyler, that she didn't understand the extent of the harm, that she's remorseful. There's a chance, a small one, but a chance that a jury could recommend leniency. With this deal, we avoid that risk. I looked at Catherine. She was watching me carefully, her expression neutral. "What do you think?" I asked. She took a breath. "I think it's not a bad deal, Douglas. 6 years is real time. Tyler gets 8. They'll both serve at least 4 to 5 years before parole is even on the table, and you'll avoid putting Charlotte through a trial." I looked back at the paper. 6 years, 8 years. I thought about the 42-page report sitting on my kitchen table, the one that said Charlotte would carry scars for the rest of her life. I thought about the email with the subject line "Endgame" about the forged power of attorney, about the plan to lock me in a nursing home and sell my house and leave my granddaughter to starve in an attic. "No," I said. Mason frowned. "Mr. Hartman." "No," I said again. I looked at Rachel Winters. A jury needs to hear Charlotte's story. They need to hear what was done to her. They need to see the photographs of that closet, read the medical reports, listen to Dr. Anderson explain what 2 years of isolation does to a child's brain. And they need to hear about the financial scheme, about how Amanda forged my signature, bribed a notary, and planned to steal everything I own so she could move to Arizona and pretend none of this ever happened. Rachel hesitated. "Mr. Hartman, I appreciate your position, but they don't get to plead down," I interrupted. My voice was steady, now louder than I intended. "They don't get to avoid the forgery charges. They don't get to walk into a courtroom and say we're sorry and serve 4 years and come out in time to start over. What they did wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of poor judgment. It was a plan, a deliberate, calculated plan. And a jury needs to know that." The room was quiet. Rachel Winters exchanged a glance with Catherine, then turned back to me. "If we go to trial, Charlotte may have to testify. The defense will call her as a witness. She'll have to sit in a courtroom and answer questions about what happened to her. She's 6 years old, Mr. Hartman. That's going to be traumatic." I felt something twist in my chest. I thought about Charlotte humming in the living room, lining up her stuffed animals, hiding granola bars under her pillow. I thought about her nightmares, her silence, the way she startled at loud noises. I knew what Rachel was saying. I knew what a trial would cost. But I also knew what it would cost if we didn't fight. "I know," I said quietly. "I know it's going to be hard for her. But if we take this deal, they get away with half of what they did. The forgery disappears, the financial abuse disappears, and the next time someone decides to lock a child in a closet and forge documents to steal from a vulnerable adult, there's no precedent, no consequence, no reason not to try." I looked at Rachel Winters. "We go to trial." She nodded slowly. "All right." She turned to Mason. "The state declines the plea. We'll see you in court." Mason gathered his papers without a word and left the room. Rachel Winters followed a moment later, leaving Catherine and me alone at the table. Catherine looked at me for a long time. "Charlotte may have to testify," she said again, softer this time. "I know. It's going to be hard for both of you." "I know," I said. "But if we don't fight, someone else's child ends up in that attic. Someone else's parent ends up in a nursing home with a forged signature on a piece of paper. This has to mean something, Catherine. It has to." She nodded. "Then we fight." I drove home in the late afternoon light, the city quiet around me. When I walked into the apartment, Charlotte was on the floor with Dorothy Wilson sorting wooden blocks by color. She looked up when I came in and smiled, small, tentative, but real. I smiled back, and I thought we fight. The envelope arrived on October 15th, 3 days before the sentencing hearing. It was plain white institutional, with a return address printed in the upper left corner, inmate #47239, Hennepin County Jail, Minneapolis, MN 55415. My name and address were written in careful blue ink, Amanda's handwriting, the same neat script she had used on birthday cards when she was a girl. I held the envelope for a long time, standing in the entryway of my apartment, my thumb pressed against the seal. I didn't open it. I set it on the kitchen counter and walked away. For 3 days I left it there. I passed it every time I made coffee, every time I washed dishes, every time I opened the refrigerator. Charlotte asked about it once. "What's that?" she said, pointing at the envelope. I told her it was junk mail. She nodded and went back to coloring. On the evening of October 18th, after Charlotte had gone to bed, I sat down at the table and opened it. The letter was short, 1 page, handwritten on lined paper. The handwriting was steady, controlled. I read it slowly. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know it doesn't undo what I did. But I need to say it anyway. I was weak. I was selfish. I failed Charlotte in every way a mother can fail a child. I told myself I was doing what was best, that Tyler had a plan, that everything would work out. But that's a lie. I knew what I was doing. I knew it was wrong. Tyler manipulated me. He told me you were getting old, that you wouldn't be able to take care of yourself much longer, that we needed to act before it was too late. He said we deserved the money that you owed us for all the years we didn't have. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because it was easier than admitting I had married someone cruel. But that's not an excuse. I made my choices. I signed the documents. I locked Charlotte in that room. I left her there while we flew halfway around the world. And I didn't think about her once while I was gone. Not once, Dad. What kind of person does that? I used to love you. I used to think you were the strongest person I knew. And now I'm sitting in a cell, waiting to be sentenced, knowing that I destroyed the one person who still believed in me. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to visit. I just need you to know that I'm sorry, and that I loved you. I still do. Amanda, I read the first half and stopped. My hands were shaking. I set the letter down on the table and stared at it, my vision blurring. I thought about the girl who used to sit on the porch steps and tell me about her day at school. I thought about the woman who had called me in July and asked me to trim a tree. I thought about the email that said endgame. I didn't finish reading. The phone rang an hour later. It was Catherine. "Douglas, I know this is hard," she said. "But the sentencing is in 2 days. Amanda's lawyer has asked if you'd be willing to visit her before the hearing. She wants to apologize in person." I closed my eyes. "No, you don't have to decide right now." "Hanukai," I said again. "I can't see her, Catherine. Not now. Maybe not ever." There was a pause. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll let them know." After we hung up, I walked back to the kitchen table and picked up the letter. I read the last few lines again. "I just need you to know that I'm sorry, and that I loved you. I still do." And then I crumpled the page in my fist and threw it in the trash. I went to bed. At 3 in the morning, I woke up and walked into the kitchen. The apartment was dark, silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stood in front of the trash can and stared down at the crumpled paper sitting on top of a coffee filter and an empty yogurt container. I didn't pull it out. I didn't smooth it flat and read it again. I just stood there looking at it, my hands at my sides. I thought about the line I hadn't been able to finish reading. What kind of person does that? I thought about the last line, "I loved you." I still do. I thought about Eleanor, about the night she passed away, about the way she had held my hand and told me that some people couldn't be saved, that sometimes the best thing you could do was let them go. I had nodded, then not really understanding. Now I understood. I turned off the kitchen light and went back to bed. But I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. I couldn't stop hearing Amanda's voice in my head, calm and careful, saying the words she had written in blue ink on lined paper. I failed Charlotte. I knew it was wrong. I'm sorry. And I couldn't stop thinking about the last line, the one that hurt the most. "I loved you. I still do." The sentencing hearing was set for 9 o'clock on October 20th in courtroom 12C at the Hennepin County Government Center. Catherine and I arrived early and rode the elevator to the 12th floor in silence. The hallway was already crowded with reporters, a television crew adjusting lights, and a handful of neighbors. Sharon Griffin stood near a window, arms folded, staring at the floor. She did not look up as I passed. I had spent 40 years in courtrooms, but always on the periphery as a witness or case manager. This time I sat in the front row as a victim. Catherine guided me through the heavy oak doors, and we took seats behind the prosecutor's table. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The judge's bench loomed high, the Minnesota state seal mounted behind it. At 9:15, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Lawrence Mitchell entered gray-haired and composed, and the room settled into silence. Moments later, Amanda and Tyler were escorted in, wearing orange jumpsuits, hands cuffed. Amanda's face was pale, her hair pulled back. She did not look at me. Tyler's jaw was tight, eyes fixed forward. They sat beside their attorney, Jeffrey Mason. Judge Mitchell reviewed the file and announced the matter before the court, State of Minnesota versus Amanda Marie Crawford and Tyler James Vaughn. Both had entered guilty pleas to child endangerment, criminal neglect, unlawful restraint, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. He invited the prosecution to proceed. Rachel Winters stood and methodically summarized the evidence. She described the attic closet, the medical findings, the forged power of attorney, the email titled Endgame, and the bribe paid to notary Elizabeth Morris. She referenced the 42-page psychological evaluation, the forensic handwriting analysis, and financial records documenting the scheme. She read from William Anderson's affidavit and from hospital intake notes recording Charlotte's weight, her blood sugar, the lice in her hair. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Mitchell turned to me and invited my victim impact statement. I rose and walked to the podium, unfolding the paper I had memorized days earlier. I told the court I would not dwell on the financial fraud or the plan to declare me incompetent. The evidence spoke for itself. I spoke instead about Charlotte. I explained that I had not known she existed until July, that for years she had lived in that house, and for at least 12 days she had been locked in an attic closet in 95-degree heat with minimal food and a bucket for a toilet. I described her nightmares, her habit of hoarding food, the way she flinched at raised voices, the developmental delays noted by Dr. Anderson. I held up a crayon drawing of a purple butterfly with crooked wings and explained that Charlotte had said the butterfly was free and could go anywhere it wanted. I told the judge that whatever the maximum sentence allowed, I was asking for it. Not for revenge, but because what had been done was deliberate and cruel, and Charlotte deserved accountability. I returned to my seat with shaking hands. Mason argued for leniency, claiming Amanda had been manipulated and remorseful, and that Tyler had a troubled past. I barely listened. Judge Mitchell asked the defendants to stand. He spoke slowly, his voice controlled and cold. In 30 years on the bench, he said he had seen many terrible cases, but this one was among the most disturbing. He addressed Amanda directly, recounting how she had locked her daughter in a closet while vacationing abroad and forged her father's signature as part of a calculated financial scheme. He stated he did not believe she was sorry for what she had done, only that she had been caught. He turned to Tyler and described him as the architect of the conspiracy, showing no remorse. He then imposed sentence. Amanda received 12 years at the Minnesota Correctional Facility at Shakopee with no parole eligibility for 8 years restitution to Charlotte's trust fund and court costs, and immediate termination of parental rights. Tyler received 15 years at St. Cloud, no parole eligibility for 10 years, restitution exceeding $500,000, a lifetime prohibition from working with children or vulnerable adults, and a permanent no-contact order regarding Charlotte. Elizabeth Morris, who had pled guilty to aiding and abetting forgery, was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, fined and stripped of her notary license. The gavel struck, and court was adjourned. As deputies led Amanda past the gallery, she turned toward me, her lips forming words I could not hear. I looked away. Outside reporters surrounded us, but Catherine declined comment and guided me to the parking garage. When we reached her car, she asked how I felt. I searched for an answer and admitted I did not know whether I would ever forgive Amanda or whether I even wanted to. Catherine said that was fair. I drove home where Dorothy Wilson was, with Charlotte helping her build a tower of blocks. When I walked in, Charlotte looked up and smiled. I smiled back and realized that for the first time in months, there was no next court date, no hearing looming, no emergency to brace for. It was over. The order came through on December 6th. Catherine called me that morning to say Judge Mitchell had signed the permanent guardianship papers. "You're official," she said. "Charlotte is legally yours." I sat at the kitchen table, the phone still in my hand, and let the words settle. Permanent. Not temporary, not conditional, not subject to review in 6 months. Permanent. Charlotte was building a castle out of wooden blocks on the living room floor, humming softly to herself. She didn't know what the word meant, yet didn't understand the difference between guardianship and adoption, didn't know that her last name would stay Hartman, that her legal status had shifted from emergency placement to something solid and unchangeable. She just knew that this was home, and that was enough. The paperwork arrived by courier 2 days later, a thick envelope with the court seal embossed on the front. I opened it at the kitchen table and read through the documents slowly. Permanent legal guardianship of minor child. Douglas William Hartman, guardian. Charlotte Marie Hartman, ward. There were pages of legal language clauses about decision-making authority, medical consent, educational rights. At the bottom of the final page, Judge Mitchell's signature was bold and clear. I filed the papers in the drawer where I kept Charlotte's birth certificate, her medical records, the 42-page psychological evaluation. I didn't tell her about it. She was 6 years old. She didn't need to know about courtrooms and legal guardianship orders. She just needed to know she was safe. The house in Edina sold 3 weeks later. Catherine had listed it in October, shortly after the sentencing hearing. It had taken longer than expected. Most buyers didn't want a house where a child had been locked in the attic, where the story had been all over the news, where neighbors still whispered when they walked past. But a developer made an offer in late November. $485,000, $15,000 below asking price. Catherine advised me to take it. I did. The sale closed on November 30th. After the mortgage was paid off, and the realtor's commission deducted, the net proceeds came to $562,000. The check was made out to the Charlotte Hartman Irrevocable Trust Care of Hennepin County Probate Court. A court-appointed trustee, a woman named Margaret Lindstrom, who had worked in estate planning for 30 years, would manage the account until Charlotte turned 18. The money would pay for her therapy, her education, whatever she needed. Amanda and Tyler would never touch a dollar of it. I didn't tell Charlotte about the house sale either. She didn't ask about the house in Edina, didn't ask where her mother had lived, didn't ask why we never went back there. She had no attachment to that place. It wasn't home. It had never been home. By mid-December, the apartment in Uptown had begun to feel like Christmas. Dorothy Wilson came over 3 afternoons a week now, not just for therapy, but because she had become part of our lives. Charlotte called her Miss Dorothy at first, then just Dorothy, and finally in early December, Grandma Dorothy. Dorothy had laughed and teared up at the same time. "I'd be honored," she said. "We bought a Christmas tree on December 10th, a small Fraser fir from a lot near Lake Calhoun. Charlotte and I carried it up to the apartment together, and Dorothy helped us string lights and hang ornaments. Charlotte was tentative at first, watching us to see if it was allowed, if touching the ornaments would get her in trouble. But Dorothy handed her a wooden reindeer and said, "This one goes right here, sweetie," and Charlotte hung it carefully on a low branch. By the time we finished, she was smiling. On December 15th, Charlotte made a card for Dorothy. She drew a picture of the 3 of us standing in front of the Christmas tree, our stick figure arms stretched wide. At the bottom, in careful block letters, she had written, "Thank you for taking care of Grandpa." Dorothy cried when she read it. She tucked it into her purse and said she would keep it forever. Christmas morning arrived clear and cold. I woke early and made coffee, standing at the window and watching the sun rise over the snow-covered street. Charlotte woke a few minutes later and padded into the living room in her pajamas. Her hair tangled her eyes, sleepy. She saw the presents under the tree and stopped. "Are those for me?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Go ahead." She knelt beside the tree and picked up the smallest package, a box wrapped in red paper with a silver bow. She held it for a moment, turning it over in her hands, and then she tore the paper off. Inside was a small stuffed butterfly with purple wings. She looked at it, and then she looked at me, and she smiled. It wasn't the tentative smile I had seen before, the one that flickered and disappeared. It was wide and genuine and free. She hugged the butterfly to her chest and laughed a real laugh, bright and unguarded, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her before. Dorothy arrived an hour later with cinnamon rolls and hot chocolate. We sat on the floor around the tree opening presents and eating breakfast. Charlotte wore a new sweater Dorothy had knitted for her green with white snowflakes and held the butterfly in her lap. She didn't hoard the gifts. She didn't hide them. She just enjoyed them. Later that afternoon, after Dorothy had gone home and Charlotte was napping on the couch, I stood at the window again and thought about Amanda. She was spending Christmas in a cell at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee, alone, wearing an orange jumpsuit, eating whatever the cafeteria served. I wondered if she was thinking about Charlotte. I wondered if she knew what she was missing this moment, this morning, this laugh. I thought about the letter she had written, the one I had thrown in the trash. "I loved you. I still do." I thought about the way she had mouthed, "I'm sorry," as the bailiff led her out of the courtroom. And I thought about Judge Mitchell's words, "I don't believe you're sorry. I believe you're sorry you were caught." I didn't know if Amanda was sorry. I didn't know if she ever would be. But I knew that Charlotte was here, safe and warm and laughing, and that was what mattered. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the lights on the Christmas tree blinked softly, casting small patches of color across the floor. Charlotte stirred on the couch, murmured something in her sleep, and settled again. And I thought, she's free. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April when Charlotte asked the question. We were at the kitchen table coloring butterflies, her small fingers carefully filling purple and yellow wings. She looked up with a seriousness that didn't belong on a 6-year-old's face and asked if her mom knew she was okay. I set my crayon down and asked what made her think about that. She said Miss Dorothy told her moms always worry about their kids, even when they're far away, then asked if her mom was far away. I told her yes. She asked again if her mom knew she was okay. I did not know how to answer. I thought about the letter Amanda had written from jail, the apology I had thrown away. I thought about the way she had mouthed, "I'm sorry," in the courtroom. I had not spoken to her in over a year. Finally, I told Charlotte I didn't know, but I could find out. That night, after Charlotte fell asleep, I called Catherine and told her I needed clearance to visit Amanda. She asked if I was sure. I admitted I wasn't, but said I needed to do it for Charlotte, not for Amanda. Catherine arranged the visit. On April 18th, I drove to the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee. The highway cut through farmland and small towns, the sky bright with early spring sun. I had visited prisons many times as a social worker, but never to see someone I loved. The complex was low and gray, surrounded by double fencing topped with razor wire. Inside, a corrections officer checked my ID, took my keys and phone, and directed me to a waiting area. After 20 minutes, a guard called my name and led me to a visiting room divided into small booths separated by plexiglass. I sat in booth 7 and waited. Amanda entered a few minutes later in a plain gray jumpsuit, thinner than I remembered, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back loosely. Her eyes were red and tired. She picked up the phone on her side of the partition. I picked up mine. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Finally, she said, "Dad," her voice hoarse. I told her I had not come for her, but because Charlotte had asked if she knew she was okay. Amanda's face collapsed. She pressed her hand to her mouth and asked how Charlotte was. I told her Charlotte was alive and safe and starting to heal, but still woke from nightmares, still hoarded food, still flinched at raised voices. No thanks to you, I added. Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face. She said she saw Charlotte's face every night in her dreams, saw the closet and the heat, and understood what she had done. I asked if she truly understood what she put Charlotte through and what she had done to me. She said yes, listing her actions without excuses, forging my signature, planning to declare me incompetent, intending to steal my home and move away, leaving Charlotte behind. Her voice broke as she admitted she had chosen Tyler over her own daughter and over me. Anger rose in me and I demanded to know why. She said Tyler had convinced her I was getting old and vulnerable, that if she didn't act first, someone else would, that Charlotte would end up in foster care. He had shown her articles and stories, stoked her fear, warned her I would take Charlotte away. She said she let that fear control her. I told her it was not an excuse. She agreed quickly. It was an explanation, she said, not an excuse. She had made the choices. She had locked the door. She had left. The anger in me did not disappear, but it shifted into something heavier and more tired. I told her Charlotte deserved better than a mother who failed her. Amanda whispered that she knew, and that she was grateful Charlotte had me. We sat quietly for a moment. Through the scratched plexiglass, I saw lines at the corners of her eyes and hollows in her cheeks that had not been there before. I asked if she was eating and whether she was in any programs. She said she worked in the kitchen and attended GED classes and a therapy group that did not allow excuses. She said she no longer wanted to make them. I thought about Charlotte's question and about the line in Amanda's letter that had lingered in my mind. I told Amanda I would tell Charlotte I had seen her and that she had asked about her. But I also said I would not bring Charlotte to the prison, not now, and perhaps not ever. She said she understood and did not deserve to see her. When the guard signaled that time was up, I stood. Amanda thanked me for coming and for taking care of Charlotte. I did not answer. I hung up the phone and walked out. The drive home was quiet. I remembered something Eleanor once told me when I was furious at a negligent parent. Forgiveness is not for them, it is for you. At the time I thought forgiveness meant saying harm did not matter. Now I understood it meant letting go of anger before it consumed you. I did not forgive Amanda that day, and perhaps I never would, but I stopped hating her. For Charlotte's sake and for my own. When I walked into the apartment, Charlotte looked up from the floor where she was building with blocks. She asked if I had seen her mom. I said yes. She asked if her mom was okay. I told her she was safe and that she had asked about her. Charlotte considered that, then nodded and returned to her tower. Maybe that was enough. 3 months after I visited Amanda Charlotte, and I stood outside 4287 Lakeview Terrace. It was July 15th, 2024, exactly 1 year since William Anderson heard her crying through the attic window. The house no longer looked the same. The new owners had painted it soft gray with white trim. The oak tree that had triggered the HOA complaint and brought William there was gone, replaced by a young maple planted in fresh soil. The lawn was tidy flowers blooming as if nothing terrible had ever happened within those walls. Charlotte held my hand and studied the house quietly. She wore a purple dress Dorothy had given her, her hair pulled back neatly. After a long moment, she said that was where she used to be. I told her yes, but she wasn't there anymore. She nodded and asked if we could go home. I told her we could. We drove back to our apartment in Uptown, the place where she had spent her first frightened nights, learning that doors stayed unlocked and food did not disappear. In September, we would move into a small house closer to her school, but for now, this was home. Over the past year, Charlotte had grown taller and stronger. Her cheeks were fuller. The food hoarding had faded after 8 months, slowly replaced by trust. Nightmares that once came 4 or 5 times a week now came once a week or less. She still saw Dr. Laura Anderson every Wednesday, talking through feelings she struggled to name. She had started second grade at Adina Elementary. Her teacher said she was quiet but engaged. She made friends: Noah, who shared crayons; Abigail, who invited her to a birthday party; Ashley, who sat beside her at lunch. When I picked her up from that first party, she had smiled and said it was fun, and I had known that was progress. Dorothy Wilson still came 3 days a week. She was more than a helper. She was family. Charlotte called her Grandma Dorothy without hesitation. They baked cookies on Tuesdays, read on Thursdays, and fed ducks at the park on Saturdays. Dorothy once told me Charlotte was the granddaughter she never had. I told her she was the mother I needed. My own life shifted as well. I began consulting part-time for Hennepin County CPS, training new social workers and reviewing cases. It gave me purpose without consuming me. It reminded me why I chose this work decades ago. Amanda remained at the correctional facility in Shakopee. Catherine kept me informed. Amanda completed her GED and worked in the prison library. She wrote letters every few months asking about Charlotte and describing her efforts to improve. I read some, kept most in a drawer for the day Charlotte might want them. Tyler remained in St. Cloud. His appeals were denied. He refused programs and blamed others. I felt little about him at all. On the night of July 15th, after a small birthday gathering with Dorothy and a few school friends, Charlotte chose the very hungry caterpillar for bedtime. As I read about the caterpillar eating and building a cocoon before becoming a butterfly, she asked if she was like the butterfly. She said she had been in the dark, and now she was different, better. I pulled her close and told her yes. She fell asleep against my chest. In the kitchen, a crayon drawing hung on the refrigerator beneath a butterfly magnet. A purple butterfly with uneven wings above green grass. In careful letters, she had written, "This is me." I stood looking at it and understood again why I became a social worker. People ask if it was worth it, if I regret what happened, if I feel guilty for destroying my daughter's life. I do not. I did not destroy Amanda's life. She did that herself. I saved my granddaughter, and that distinction matters. Over the year, I have thought often about justice, mercy, and healing. They are not opposites. Justice meant prison sentences, yes, but more importantly, it meant Charlotte being safe. It meant her first genuine laugh on Christmas morning, her first day of school, the day she stopped hiding food and started asking for seconds. Mercy was not saying it was okay. I have not forgiven Amanda in the way people imagine. But I let go of the rage because carrying it was harming both Charlotte and me. Mercy, I learned, is for the one who carries the hurt. Healing has been slow and uneven. There are still hard nights. There are questions I cannot answer. But she is healing little by little, like wings strengthening after leaving a cocoon. In August, Sharon Griffin came to my door in tears and admitted she had heard crying for months and should have called someone. I told her honestly that she should have. Silence is a choice, and sometimes it is the wrong one. William Anderson called on the anniversary of the day he made that phone call. He said he almost convinced himself it was none of his business. I told him he saved her life. He insisted I did. The truth is, we both did, along with Dr. Morgan, Officer Stevens, Emily Richardson, Catherine, Dr. Anderson, and Dorothy. Charlotte survived because people chose not to look away. After 40 years in child protection, I have seen many children in danger and many families in crisis. I did my best. Some cases still weigh on me. But Charlotte is different. Every difficult conversation and courtroom testimony prepared me for the moment my own granddaughter needed protection, and I had to choose between her and my daughter. I chose Charlotte. One Sunday afternoon, she held up another drawing of a butterfly and read the words she had written beneath it. I was in the dark, but Grandpa helped me fly. I felt gratitude swell in my chest. I hung it on the refrigerator beside the others. Each morning when I make coffee, I see those drawings, and remember that the work was never about saving everyone. It was about saving the child in front of me. Charlotte is 7 now. She goes to school, laughs with friends, sleeps in a bed, eats at a table, and fills our home with bright paper butterflies. And every time I see them, I think this is why. Not for revenge, not even for justice alone, but for a little girl who was trapped in the dark and is learning to fly. If you've listened to every word of Charlotte's story, I need to tell you something that weighs on my heart. Looking back at this family betrayal, at how my own daughter nearly destroyed everything, I see God's fingerprints everywhere. That oak tree violation, William's decision to call me, Charlotte's purple butterfly drawings. None of it was coincidence. It was mercy. But here's the truth that keeps me awake. I almost missed it all. I almost ignored the HOA notice. I almost told William not to worry about the crying sound. And if I had been too proud, too tired, too convinced that family betrayal only happens to other people, Charlotte would still be trapped. So let me be clear. Don't make the mistakes I made. Don't wait. Don't assume. When you witness something wrong, whether it's family betrayal, a child suffering, or an elderly neighbor being exploited, you have a choice. You can look away and tell yourself it's not your concern, or you can pick up the phone, make the call. Be the person who refuses silence. Grandpa stories like mine exist because good people saw something and said nothing. Grandpa stories become tragedies when we convince ourselves someone else will help. But grandpa stories can also become stories of rescue if just one person has the courage to act. I spent 40 years as a social worker, and I learned this evil doesn't always look like monsters. Sometimes it looks like your own child. Sometimes it wears a familiar face and speaks in a voice you've known since birth. That's what makes it so hard. That's why we hesitate. But Charlotte didn't have the luxury of my hesitation. She needed someone to choose her over comfort, over family loyalty, over the fear of what people would say. And God put me in that exact position for a reason. So I'm asking you, who is your Charlotte? Who is the person right in front of you, waiting for someone to see them, to speak up, to act? Don't wait until it's too late. Don't let fear silence you. Don't assume someone else will do what only you can do. If this moved you, please comment below and tell me what would you do. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so we can continue these important conversations together. Your engagement helps more people find the courage to act when it matters most. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'm deeply grateful you walked this difficult journey with me. A final note. This narrative includes fictionalized elements crafted for educational impact. If it doesn't resonate with you, feel free to explore other content better suited to your preferences. Remember, one phone call can change everything. One choice can save a life.